You can start when you so Bonjour, collègues. Good morning. This is meeting number 9 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, Tuesday, April 19th, 2016. I remind everyone that I need to do it as well, but we are televised today, and so we should take our telephones or our cell phones and put them on silent mode or shut them off. And I haven't done mine yet. I'll do that in a moment, but I encourage you to do it. Today we're continuing our consideration of the fall 2015 report of the Auditor General of Canada, and we are studying Chapter 1, Implementing Gender-Based Analysis. We have 2 groups of witnesses, a full house today. The first group will have up to 7 minutes to provide us with opening statements and answer the questions from the members of Parliament on our committee. And the second group of witnesses are also here. They're sitting in some of the chairs just in behind our witnesses, and they're also available for questions or to answer questions should you have them. I'll take a moment to introduce all of our witnesses. From the Office of the Auditor General of Canada, we have Richard Domining from the Privy Council Privy Council Office. We have Les Linklater, Deputy Secretary to the Cabinet, Operations. From the Treasury Board Secretariat, Renee Lafontaine, Assistant Secretary, Corporate Services and Chief Financial Officer from the amended section. And from the Status of Women Canada, we have Mina Ballantyne, Head of the agency. And the witnesses that will be available for questioning are the following. Department of Industry, Mitch Davies, Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategic Policy Sector, Department of Indian Affairs and Northern Development, Nicole Kennedy, Director General, Strategic Policy, Cabinet and Parliamentary Affairs, and Department of Employment and Social Development, Jacques Paquette, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategic and Service Policy Branch, and from the Department of Natural Resources, Neil Bauer, Assistant Deputy Minister, Science and Policy Integration. So I welcome you all here this morning. Most of you maybe have come before committee before. You'll find your earphone or the translation, which is just underneath the desk there, and channel 1, I think, is the French, and channel 2 will be the English. And we'll begin with our Auditor General's Department and Richard Domining from the Office of the Auditor General. If you would begin, please.
Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie de me donner l'occasion.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about the comparative analysis. The comparative analysis, the gender-based comparative analysis, also known as GBA, is a tool that evaluates distinctive effects on women and men of legislative measures and programs. It is intended to help policymakers consider gender issues and support decision-making. Implementing this tool can help integrate social, economic, and gender differences into policy development. At a United Nations conference in 1995, the Government of Canada committed to analyzing gender-specific policy impacts on women and men before making decisions. Our audit focused on the implementation of GBA, an area we first examined in 2009. Our 2015 audit included Status of Women Canada, Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat, the Privy Council Office, and 4 departments. At the time, they were known as Employment and Social Development Canada, Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Canada, Industry Canada, and Natural Resources Canada. In our audit, we selected and examined a total of 16 recent policy initiatives from the 4 departments. During our analysis, or during the audit rather, we observed that gender-based analysis was still not fully deployed across the federal government, even though 20 years had passed since the government had committed to applying this type of analysis to its policy decisions. In other words, gender considerations including obstacles to the full participation of diverse groups of women and men, are not always considered in government decisions. This finding is similar to what we found in our 2009 audit. We also found in our 2015 audit that a gender-based analysis framework was not implemented in 6 of the 25 departments and agencies that had committed to implementing the 2009 government-wide Departmental Action Plan on GBA.
By the sample department were not always complete nor of consistent quality. A complete GBA was performed by the 4 departments for half of the 16 sample initiatives. Examining the Family Violence Prevention Program at Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Canada, we found evidence that the completion of GBA contributed to program development. We found that the Status of Women Canada, the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat, and the Privy Council Office made progress in promoting and supporting the application of gender-based analysis in the federal government. For example, Status of Women Canada developed guidance, documents, tools, and online training materials for departments and agencies. It also drafted a new GBA strategic plan. The Secretariat and Privy Council Office clarified their expectation about what information on gender issues needed to be reported in cabinet documents. Despite all these efforts, departments and agencies face barriers to including gender-based analysis in policy development. These barriers can include the absence of mandatory requirements to conduct GBA, tight deadline for developing policy initiatives, and limited review by senior management of the completeness of GBA. The central agencies and Status of Women Canada have agreed with our recommendation and prepared an action plan to address them. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening statement. I would be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move just down the table to Ms. Ballantyne from the Status of Women, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour à tous.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to everyone. It is a real pleasure to be here today.
And to talk about our response to the fall report of the Auditor General of Canada. Je pense que le comité a reçu des...
I think that the committee has received copies of the action plan that was drafted by us at Status of Women in Canada and the Privy Council Office, as well as the Treasury Board Secretariat, in order to respond to the Auditor General's report. The plan deals with the next 4 years, 2016 to 2020. The Government of Canada is determined to apply GBA throughout federal departments and agencies. Gender-based analysis, or GBA, is important because it helps us advance gender equality by ensuring the federal government considers women and men's different experiences when we create new policies, programs, and legislation.
To incorporate GBA into their decision-making processes. As an agency, Status of Women Canada has a specific role in supporting the use of GBA across federal organizations. We act as a center of excellence or expertise on gender issues within the federal government. This includes providing departments and agencies with the training, tools, and guidance they need to effectively incorporate GBA in their decisions. The government's support for GBA as a priority is reflected in our Minister's Mandate Letter and was underscored by Budget 2016, which provides for increased investments in Status of Women Canada over the next 5 years. These new resources will enhance the agency's capacity to implement our GBA mandate, which is central to help galvanize action across federal departments and agencies. Comme je l'ai dit plus tôt, nous accueillons favorablement de...
As I indicated earlier, we welcomed the Auditor General's report. Status of Women Canada and the Privy Council Office, as well as the Treasury Board Secretariat, will continue to work closely together to respond to the Auditor General's recommendations. In a few moments, you will hear from my colleagues about their respective actions.
highlight a few of the actions that Status is taking to respond to the AG's recommendations. So the first one is enhanced tools and training. Beginning this year, Status of Women Canada will begin working with PCO and TBS to identify and analyze and address barriers to GBA implementation as a way to understand what tools, training, and other resources are needed to better implement GBA. This process has started by consulting with other federal departments and agencies at all levels, including at the deputy level, on current barriers that are preventing more consistent use of GBA in the development of new government initiatives. Based on these findings, we'll be working with PCO and TBS to address these barriers by enhancing our GBA tools and training. This includes developing new tools or new training for different sectors, such as the science and security sectors, or functional communities like the research community or the evaluation community across government. It also involves updating and modernizing our online tools and resources that other departments can use in their own capacity building. We'll also be, second of all, we'll also be strategically influencing some key government initiatives. With the three of us, Status of Women, PCO, and TBS, we'll work together with the departments and agencies to provide greater focus, to intervene very strategically, to provide gender advice on some of the key government initiatives moving forward. So this will include working with the central agencies to identify which areas is GBA particularly relevant. For example, when an initiative has a potentially significant impact on women and/or diverse groups, such as health research, when it is related to one of our agency's priorities, and our priorities are preventing violence against women, encouraging economic prosperity and leadership among women, or when it's a high government priority initiative, such as infrastructure and shelters for women fleeing violence, which I'll expand on shortly. We'll identify, in collaboration with our colleagues in other departments, priority initiatives where we'll work together on GBA collaboration and provide whatever support is needed. And we'll also internally within Status of Women Canada have analysts who will be assigned to various departments, portfolios, or issues and really drill down deeper into some of those GBA issues. So a couple of practical examples on how we're playing this role. For example, we worked very recently on the federal government's social infrastructure strategy. This resulted, we provided some data which showed how many women and children are turned away every year from shelters, which then led to a greater investment in shelters and transition housing to better meet the needs of women and children. We're also working very closely with the Canadian Armed Forces, who have recently released a directive integrating gender perspectives into military planning and operations, with the understanding that operational effectiveness is enhanced when diversity is considered. These are just a couple of examples of concrete actions where we were able to work with the relevant departments and impact programs and policies to reflect the realities of women. Our third area of focus is going to be on monitoring and reporting on progress. We're going to, again, continue to work with PCO and TBS to develop and implement a more robust framework for monitoring progress in GBA capacity and implementation across government. We need to put enhanced structures in place so that we can more systematically monitor and reflect on our progress. Some of the actions to support this initiative will include surveying all deputies on an annual basis to collect information on GBA implementation. I've recently sent out a letter in collaboration with my colleagues to all deputies, asking them to identify issues such as what are the barriers to implementation, what are some of the training and tools that they are working on or they need help with, what are some of the initiatives that they're going to apply GBA to in moving forward. We're also going to be looking at indicators. This is work that is just beginning in terms of how are we going to define success and how are we going to track progress as we continue to monitor and report. And again, you know, the Auditor General, his office did the audit in 2009 and then in 2015, and now it's up to us to basically report on progress within the government. So we're looking at various ways of doing that, at least periodically and certainly but in the next 5 years. So one of the key reasons for improving our ability to report progress on the application of GBA is to demonstrate to Canadians how doing so can improve the decisions government makes, which in turn can make a real difference to their lives. And this is true whether we're talking about a program, a policy, or a piece of legislation that's related to the security, safety, health, the economy, or another area. L'amélioration des suivis et des rapports nous permet.
Better monitoring and reporting will also provide us with practical examples of GBA's success stories that we can then share with Canadians, provinces, and territories, as well as our international partners, many of whom look to Canada and the federal government for leadership in this area. The plans we are describing today reflect the federal government's renewed commitment to supporting the full implementation of gender-based analysis.
Colleagues in the PCO and TBS and across federal departments and agencies, using a whole-of-government approach, we will be better able to meet the needs of all Canadians while advancing gender equality across our country. Thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues on the right.
All right, thank you, Ms. Ballantyne. And now to Mr. Linklater, please.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today about this important commitment. I would like to thank the Auditor General and his office for their report and recommendations. Thank you also to my colleague from Status of Women Canada for outlining the overarching framework under which we will work collaboratively together and with all federal departments and agencies to improve the implementation of GBA across government. As was noted, we are seeing a renewed commitment to GBA within the federal government. This is evidenced in the Prime Minister's mandate letter to the Minister of Status of Women, which instructed our departments to work together to ensure that GBA is applied to proposals for cabinet decision-making.
The recommendations of the Auditor General's report are coming at an opportune time to provide an assessment of the progress we've made, as well as the challenges that remain to fully implementing our GBA commitments across government. The Privy Council Office supports Cabinet decision-making through providing leadership, coordination, advice, and analysis on policy, program, and legislative proposals. In this role, we play a critical challenge function in ensuring departments and agencies take into account all relevant factors, including gender, in the development of policy and program proposals being submitted for consideration by Cabinet. This is done to ensure that the impacts on diverse groups of women and men are given due consideration in decision-making. While the audit found that we have made efforts to promote and support GBA and to clarify our guidance to departments and agencies in this respect, the audit also provided us an opportunity to reflect on how we can do better, and you will have seen our proposed actions in the plan we've distributed. My colleague from Status of Women has highlighted a number of areas for joint action, so I will focus on some of PCO's specific commitments. As she mentioned, one area we are looking at is enhanced tools and training. Acknowledging the need to build our internal capacity with respect to GBA, we have already moved forward on making GBA training mandatory for all PCO employees who are tasked with playing a challenge function, as well as for executives. This will ensure that PCO employees are able to meaningfully engage with departments and agencies on GBA, making sure that the gender and diversity impacts of proposals are clear, that these inform policy options, and that any appropriate mitigation strategies are identified. To support this work, we have committed to further strengthening our guidance on the inclusion of GBA in proposals to Cabinet. We will ensure that departments and agencies are linked to relevant tools from Status of Women and encourage their use. The process of the audit also made clear to us that we could improve the documentation of GBA and PCO's challenge function. To this end, we are developing a policy considerations checklist, which will include GBA as a mandatory section. Rather than a checking the box exercise, we see this as a tool to help departments walk through the key considerations required when drafting policy or program proposals. Our goal is that this will be used to identify gender and other diversity impacts early in the policy development process, when they can meaningfully inform the development of options, mitigation strategies, and advice. Enfin, nous sommes résolus à poursuivre notre collaboration.
Finally, we are committed to continuing to work with Status of Women Canada to identify good practices in GBA, as well as to identify departments and agencies who are struggling to meet their GBA commitments. For these, we will continue to link them with support required, for example, by reaching out to Status of Women on key policy files, as well as to encourage them to build their internal capacity, recognizing the strong and renewed mandate for implementing GBA moving forward. Strong and effective GBA practices have guided government over the years to ensure greater equality between women and men in all areas of government programming. We will both continue and strengthen our efforts to ensure that policy and program proposals are meeting the needs of all Canadians. Thank you for your time, and I will now turn to my colleague from the Treasury Board Secretariat.
Ms. LaFontaine, please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the invitation to appear before your committee, and I'm delighted to speak to you today on behalf of the Treasury Board of Canada's Secretariat, and I'm also pleased to be here with my colleagues from Status of Women Canada and the Privy Council Office. So, le gouvernement reconnaît l'importance de...
The government recognizes the importance of conducting gender-based analysis because it informs decision makers of the impacts of government policies, programs, and initiatives could have on diverse groups of men and women that make up Canada today. In light of the Auditor General's Fall 2015 report on implementing gender-based analysis, I would like to take this opportunity today to update you on the progress TBS has made in challenging federal departments and agencies to use gender-based analysis and our plan of action going forward.
The analytical tool that helps us understand why certain groups are not benefiting from our programs and services in the same way as other groups may be. It's only after knowing why this is happening that we become equipped to adjust our policies, programs, and services to achieve the gender parity that we're seeking. So as you know, ministers seek Treasury Board approval for their proposals of new policies, programs, and services through Treasury Board submissions. The Auditor General talked about that in his report. And as part of the challenge function performed by TBS program analysts on all aspects of these proposals, what I mean by that is they assess whether the costs to implement the program are complete and accurate. They actually look at the capacity of departments to deliver the programs that are being proposed to Treasury Board. And TBS staff, during this challenge function that they perform, they also ask departments if there could be a negative impact or a negative gender impact on the program being put forward, and would there be any implications on the Canadians who are supposed to benefit from those programs. So, comme le vérificateur général a constaté,
as the Auditor General observed, the Secretariat has been supporting federal organizations to implement GBA by clarifying our expectations of departments and requirements for conducting gender-based analysis, where applicable, and by providing guidance throughout the development process for Treasury Board submissions.
Federal departments and agencies for considering GBA Plus when drafting Treasury Board submissions has been posted on the Secretariat's website, so departments understand what we're expecting. Training for TBS analysts and their executive directors who work directly with departments on this every day is refreshed every year to help better identify gender impacts of policy and program proposals through casework, best practices, and lessons learned. En 2011, le Secretariat.
In 2011, the Secretariat conducted a baseline survey of the degree to which gender-related issues were identified and addressed in the 618 departmental submissions considered by Treasury Board that year.
About 1/3 were selected for an in-depth review and the potential for gender impacts. Of these, only 41 had identified gender-related issues in the content of their submissions. Encouragingly, all 41 cases had been adjusted, the programs had been adjusted to ensure that the programs were accessible and benefited both genders. Sans trop de surprise, nous avons...
Not surprisingly, we also found evidence that the level of adoption of conducting GBA as a standard business practice varied from department to department.
Causes of gender issues can be difficult in our experience. In many cases, departments did not have the gender disaggregated information and data about the recipients or the beneficiaries of their programs. And as a result of that, collecting that information would have been costly and most likely delayed the implementation of a very good program. For other proposals, gender implications of the work are not immediately obvious. So, compte tenu de ces enjeux,
The Secretariat decided to improve analyst training to identify gender issues early in the Treasury Board submission process in order to give departments extra time to conduct full, evidence-based analyses. We and the departments still continue to struggle to make it all work. The Secretariat has been working closely with Status of Women Canada and the PCO to promote the value of GBA, notably during meetings with senior executive committees, as well as during conferences and workshops with departmental GBA champions.
We are committed to continuing to reduce barriers and build capacity across the public service to ensure that GBA Plus is solidly embedded in TB policy development, program analysis, and evaluation. We will engage deputy heads to discuss progress towards public service-wide implementation, including any barriers they may encounter in consultation with our colleagues here at the table today. And nous examinerons également nos directives.
We will also review our guidance and, if necessary, adapt it to the needs of federal departments and agencies to make sure that it is more helpful in achieving better gender outcomes. We are also planning to orient Treasury Board ministers on the value of GBA to inform their decision-making on relevant Treasury Board submissions.
TBS will conduct another review, just like we did in 2011, by the fall of 2017 of the extent to which GBA findings influence decision-making by the Treasury Board between September this year and June 2017. And because we know that federal regulations impact both genders in Canadian society, we will train regulatory analysts that work for us as well, and also challenge departments and agencies to conduct GBA, where applicable, in the federal regulation development process. Finally, as the program evaluation is another effective means of assessing programs and policies, the Secretariat will assist Status of Women Canada to develop guidance and tools to help program evaluators across the public service identify gender impacts when evaluating the performance of federal policies, programs, and services. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chairman, Treasury Board Secretariat is committed to working with our partners in order to strengthen the development of informed, evidence-based, and gender-equitable policy and program options for decision-makers to provide better results for Canadians.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. LaFontaine. So we have heard this morning now from the Auditor General's Department, from the Status of Women, from the Privy Council, as well as from the Treasury Board Secretariat. There's a number of other departments that are not going to be giving presentations, but they were named in the Auditor General's report, both as doing some good things as well as there being other areas for improvement. We want those folks to be able to answer questions if you would have in specific departments. So we'll begin with Ms. Shanahan, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to all the witnesses that appeared here this morning. I think where I'm a little confused is who exactly is responsible for implementing, for making sure that gender-based analysis happens. I think we're all agreed that the purpose of GBA Plus is to produce better policy right from the get-go. And I'm seeing a number of things that, to my mind, would make this a better case. That would go back to the educational formation of analysts, of just our original thinking when somebody gets an idea to produce a program. What are the elements that go in there? So I'm a little skeptical of a sort of top-ending it, where at the end of all of that process, wait a minute, we didn't do GBA Plus, let's go back again. It's too late there. But at the same time, somebody needs to call it and say whether it's been done or not. So I'd like to hear from, I guess, a bit from the Auditor General about what you found in the process. From Status of Women about how you're finding that supporting role. I thought you guys were in charge, but it's not the case. And then, of course, Privy Council and Treasury Board. So as a new MP, I'm certainly learning about the chain of command. The other thing I want to throw in there is I did the online test last night for fun. I didn't get 100%. I went back and I did it several times. There's a couple of questions there, specifically around, as an individual, what are you responsible for? So, was it all of it? Was it none of it? I couldn't get to that answer.
The Auditor General, Mr. Dominguez.
So what I'll do, Mr. Chair, is go back on some of the issues we saw in the report. The first thing we saw was that the framework to introduce GBA was not applied uniformly across the sample departments. And as we mentioned at the end of the report in paragraph 158, we suggest a number of barriers that could explain that. And one of them is that there's no mandatory requirement to do GBA. For example, for environmental issues, they have what they call strategic environmental assessment, for which there is a cabinet directive. In this case, there's no obligation to do any GBA. So that's the first thing we noticed. The framework is not applied properly, and this might be explained by the fact that it's not mandatory. We also noticed that when it's done, it's not done equally. Some do it well, some don't do it well. For some initiative, it's very well done. For others, it's done quickly. The challenge function by senior management is not always there. So we saw example where we saw that in a TB submission, there was no gender impact reported, but there was no analysis performed to reach that conclusion. So I think what you saw today in the action plan appears to be, and we didn't assess the action plan in detail, but it looks as if it's steps in the right direction. What remains to be done, and I think the main challenge is those barriers. Will this challenge plan, action plan address the challenges associated with those barriers? That remains to be seen.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you for taking the online course. That's great because, and I would encourage all of you to take it because it really is, does help people think about GBA not as a specific resource or program, but it's a way of thinking about the impact on men and women. So, so to answer your question about who's responsible for GBA, I view it as a shared responsibility across government departments. So yes, Status of Women Canada, I don't think we were ever in charge, but we are the ones who live and breathe it because this is, about achieving gender equality. GBA is a tool to achieve gender equality. So through our courses and the tools and the guidance, we can provide those to departments. Our colleagues at PCO and TBS can provide the challenge function, and you're absolutely right that by the time it comes to an MC or Treasury Board submission, it's kind of late to say, oh, we're going to go back and really look at this program differently because of that. So we're trying to work very strategically at the front end, try to invest more resources, more time and effort to say which are the areas where it makes sense to actually look at GBA, actually take a look and say, does it have a disproportionate impact on women? Does it create barriers for participation of women? And not just women in general, but specific age groups or income levels or ethnicity. So that's the GBA plus. So we're going to try to do that through this new action plan. But really, it's a shared responsibility because we can try as much as we want, and if there's no uptake by departments or anything, it's not going to work. But I really feel that this time around, in terms of what has actually changed, is first of all, we have the AG's report, which has galvanized all of us into action. We have the government's commitment to gender equality. We have our minister, who's been charged by the Prime Minister in her mandate letter to pay attention to GBA, and she is very, very willing and active. She's written to all her ministerial colleagues. I've written to all my deputy colleagues to talk about some of the details on it. We also got the investments in budget 2016, and I'd just like to say it's not about resources in terms of, we could have double the resources but still not be effective. So it's not about money, it's about buy-in and commitment. And we have the three of us as the central agency, so to speak, actually steering this and really taking a look at it. And departments are very engaged. And now it's basically how are we going to monitor and report on it and talk about what does success look like in 5 years? What are the indicators? What policies or programs did change because we did an effective GBA? So to me, those are all the success factors. And yes, time will tell whether we're able to do it, but certainly all the conditions that we needed are there to make a difference this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shanahan. We'll now move to Mr. Gaudin. Vous avez 7 minutes.
You have 7 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all of you. I won't designate each one of you because there are several one of you. And so I appreciate you all being here this morning and for participating in this exercise. As my colleague mentioned, who is responsible for GBA? That's an existential question, but it's important to answer it. I would like to know, perhaps from the Treasury Board Secretariat, who is responsible for applying GBA? Personally, I find this very important. I find that equity is important, but now to determine who's responsible for it and find the mechanisms that are necessary to make sure it's effective. The representative from Status of Women Canada indicated that it's a shared responsibility. And so how can we implement measures, tools, an action plan that will be effective? 3 departments are present. The Auditor General has a representative. Everyone here is working in good faith. And yet you are not able to impose this. And it was mentioned that it's not a matter of resources. It's a matter of models, structures. What would be the best structure or template to ensure its effectiveness? It's existed since 1995. There was an evaluation in 2009. Now it's 2016, and we're looking towards 2020. Could we reassure me to make sure that measures are going to be implemented? After reading the documents that I have, it seems that there are all conditions. It's qualified with statements like, we think. That does not reassure me as an elected representative because our responsibility is to maximize the use of public funds. I would like someone to reassure me this morning, and what are the most effective ways to ensure that this is indeed effective? Several may answer my question.
With Ms. Ballantyne, and then perhaps to our Secretariat and back to our Privy Council.
Merci de la question.
Thank you for your question. You are entirely right. This isn't mandatory. What I would say is that this time we have a great deal of engagement. Government leadership has expressed that this is a very high priority. And I think that we have structures in place now, along with committees and the 3 central agencies and initiatives that my colleagues have just described to you. We're working a great deal with other departments. If you wouldn't mind, I would answer in English.
Mais avec le monitoring and reporting, I think we'll be able to, have more focus and share more best practices across departments, and then have it out there publicly so that people will see whether whether they're doing what they said they were supposed to do, or whether it's had an impact. So I think the system with all these measures in place should adjust. And it's basically, in terms of whether mandatory is the question or not, I think I see this as the comply or explain kind of policies that are out there in terms of, for board leadership, and instead of going to quotas, different countries are trying, show us what you're doing, make it much more open and transparent, and then explain if you haven't done it and why you haven't done it, and that should create the pressure in the system for us to be able to advance. But I'll ask my colleagues to expand.
I'll answer in English. It is a very good question, and I think in my remarks I mentioned this is complex stuff. Even one of the programs that was cited in the Auditor General's report, it's from the former Industry Canada, and they talked about the Computers for School program. One of the challenges we're facing is the complexity of where the way these program structures are designed. So while you're quite right, it's perfectly, the best way to go is to identify it in the policy research stage. So by the time the MC gets to PCO, that we know the gender implications of the program, and that by the time it gets to Treasury Board, we understand how it's going to affect Canadians, and that would be perfect. I guess one of the things that happens is through this process, program structures are complex. We often use third parties or other NGOs who work with us to deliver our programs and results. And sometimes the GBA or the gender implications are not always obvious up front. It takes a bit of experience and understanding that the departments learn about implementing their programs. So one of the things I wanted to add to what my colleague from the Status of Women in Canada was talking about is another way we can help with that is we have a whole community of program evaluators that work in departments across government. They look at the stock of programs, and every 5 years, at least once every 5 years, programs need to be evaluated. And so we're going to better train that community to be able to look at GBA implications if we miss it the first time round. It's not the ideal solution, but it starts to close that circle so that before a program becomes renewed, we can understand better the gender implications and make those corrections necessarily if we miss them the first time around. Thank you.
Mr. Linklater, do you have anything to add from the Privy Council?
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Juste pour ajouter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that the Auditor General's report led to a great deal of action among responsible agencies to develop policies, as well as among departments. I would say that the action plan that is being developed now will have a whole host of broader activities compared to before. The commitment on behalf of our agencies to ensure follow-up and reporting will be very significant. This is something that we have not really done in the past. And now, with the commitment of the Prime Minister and the government in this priority, which is GBA, the Minister for Status of Women will ensure that when there are cabinet discussions, we will add this perspective to deliberations about policy. I believe that this action plan will lead to improved results and demonstrate the commitment of various departments.
To the next one, Mr. Christofferson, please, for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all very much for your attendance today. I have to say, among things that make me angry, this one is getting close to the top of the list. 20 years ago, we made a commitment at the United Nations to a great deal of fanfare that we were committed to this, and here we are 20 years later with an Auditor General report saying fail, fail, fail. And all I'm hearing, quite frankly, is, oh, we'll do better this time. So I'm going to return to that because that's not acceptable. That's not nearly enough. We went down that road once already back in 2009. We're not going down that road again. Government said in their opening remarks, who we got here, Madame Ballantyne, on behalf of the Status of Women, said, I quote, "The Government of Canada has a long-standing commitment to implementing gender-based analysis," and we know how serious that was. Continuing to quote, "GBA is important because it helps us advance gender equality by ensuring the federal government considers women and men's different experiences when we create new policies, programs, and legislation." So therefore, it suggests that if this is important to gender equity and you didn't do this, then gender equity has not been a priority to any government up till now. Because you can't have it both ways. You can't go bragging and say, we think GBA is really, really important to get gender equality in Canada, and then not do it. Because then it speaks to how strong the commitment is to gender equity. And at this point, it doesn't look very strong. Moving on. Now, this is the stuff that really just makes public accounts committees go through the roof. We've been here before. The 2009 audit found almost identical problems. And what's interesting, Chair, is that the recommendations are oh so similar. I mean, in 2009, we see from the Auditor General Report 1.16, status of women. This is their response. They recommended, the Auditor General recommended this, and the status said they do it. In consultation with the Treasury Board of Canada, Secretariat, and Privy Council Office, establish a plan for facilitating implementation of gender-based analysis and clarify expectations, blah, blah, blah. And then we've got almost the identical wording, or at least concept, where in today's document they're saying beginning this year, Status of Women Canada will begin working with the Privy Council Office and Treasury Board to identify, analyze, and address barriers to GBA implementation as a way to understanding tool. Look, this is exactly the same thing we had last time. And when I heard things like from the chair of the Status, Madame Ballantyne, this time we have engagement. Engagement. What's that mean? Comply or explain. Why are we dancing? My question, we heard very clearly from the Auditor General, one of the main barriers to not having GBA in the federal government in Canada is because it's not mandatory. I want somebody there from the government, I don't care which one of you, you give me a really good reason why it shouldn't be mandatory. And then we don't have to worry about all this engagement, it'll be different, and comply or explain. Why don't we just make it mandatory and be done with it? Please. Through you, Chair.
Christofferson. Everybody take a deep breath, and Ms. Ballantyne, I defer to you first, perhaps, or Mr. Linklater.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the issues that are raised are very important, and I think the fact that there's frustration with progress would flag the need for redoubled efforts on the part of all government officials to ensure that gender-based analysis is informing policy and program development. The experience in the past, I think, has allowed us to learn that there are barriers to implementation across government, that departments may not necessarily have the tools and the capacity to be able to advance gender-based analysis to a level that is going to make a difference in their program and policy development.
Please answer my question. Give me a good reason why we aren't going straight to mandatory, please.
In terms of making GBA mandatory, I think, as my colleague from Status was saying, as we look at developing the suite of tools to respond to the Auditor General's report, there are a number of opportunities we have to engage with departments to ensure that they're actually doing GBA. I think the Auditor General would say that there were probably some challenges with the audit in terms of actually documenting the work that departments do.
Sorry, Chair, I don't mean to be rude. You know we're limited time. I asked a very simple question, sir. Give me good rationale, public policy reason why we don't go to mandatory. You're dancing around it, sir, with respect. Why? Give me the argument. Why aren't you doing mandatory?
Go ahead.
Hi. What I would say is that it is mandatory for departments to to tell PCO, tell the government in the MC process, in the Treasury Board submissions, they have to say if they've done a GBA, what's the analysis to back that up, what was the impact, so they have to explain, and as my colleague...
So the Auditor General was wrong? Excuse me, the Auditor General's Department just said that one of the things that would clear this up is mandatory. You're not going there. I'm asking you to give an explanation why, and I am still not hearing it.
Go ahead, Ms. Ballantyne.
Yeah, I think what
remember,
I'm saying
all comments through the chair, please.
What I'm saying is that it is mandatory for all departments in the MC development process to say that they have done a GBA. It's going to be much more intensive now. They'll have to explain that they've done it and this is the impact or this is what changed. They'll have to show the data. It's the checklist that my colleague was talking about. So it is mandatory in that sense. They won't be able to go past the gate without...
Well, let's ask the fellow right beside you. It sounds like they're saying, hey, we're already doing it. So maybe I'll give you a chance to correct the record, because clearly you misspoke yourself.
I don't think that's what she was saying. I think she said that they've
Chair, I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
I
You
can
have 30
myself.
seconds to answer the question.
So there is no policy that requires GBA to be performed. This being said, it is true that when the departments prepare an MC or a TB submission, there is in the template a section that they have to fill out showing that they did perform a GBA. What we saw in the report, however, is that some of those sections are not based on what we consider a complete GBA. We saw evidence that no gender impact was identified, but there was no gender analysis to support that conclusion.
Thank you. We'll go to Ms. Murray.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for your testimony. I was struck by the comments about where in the process this could be placed, because policy, programs, and legislation are long, complex processes that can take years, and the later in the process, probably the more complicated it would be to do an analysis, but at the front end, it can actually drive the design of the plan and the program. So could you? And I noticed that the PCO representative, Mr. Linklater, did mention that. So could you talk about where in the process currently? What is the process? Where in that cycle currently does the GBA tend to happen? And what do you think would happen if this would be a much earlier, inserted earlier in the process? And if there is a chance for a quick comment by one of the departments about, have you experienced doing it earlier and what did that lead to? Thank you.
I'm happy to respond. I think depending on the initiative and the department, you'll find a variety in terms of a variety of approaches in terms of the application of GBA. Some departments have the tools and the capacity to, from the outset, understand what the data collection needs are, what the evaluation framework would be to enable them to capture the gender implications of their policy or program development. Those departments tend to do it up front, which leads to better outcomes. The Auditor General may have views in terms of quality. I wouldn't want to speak for his office. In other cases, as the Auditor General said, when we do get the draft of the memorandum to Cabinet, there may be a line saying no gender-based or no gender considerations were assessed as part of this proposal. One of the challenges we have is for our analysts to be able to know when to go back to the department to engage with them, to make sure that they're asking the appropriate challenge function questions, which is why as part of our action plan at PCO, we're now making GBA Plus training mandatory for our analysts so that that becomes part of their policy development and challenge function process. It's automatic. What are the gender considerations around this proposal? My sense is that as we work together on the action plan, if we can move departments along with us to begin to take those considerations into account from the outset, that's going to lead to better outcomes, both in terms of departmental capacity, but also reporting to Canadians.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I just would add to what my colleague has said by explaining we've decided that we would make investments in improving the data, the evidence base that would apply to a whole host of policy decisions. So it's getting to the point about when you need to do this. You actually need to have some investment on the data, the disaggregated data you need to develop and drive good policy development. I mean, part of this is making it happen, but also having the information, the evidence you need to do a good job at it. So, for example, last fiscal year, we funded, our department funded Status of Women in Canada to develop a specific chapter in its Women in Canada report. It'll be published in June on women, education, and technology, because there's a lot of issues in respect of participation of women in STEM fields, technical fields, the kind of fields that are going to drive the industrial revolution we're undertaking, and ensuring that all Canadians participate in that kind of future. So we really need better data. We need to have much more information analysis done, so we funded that sort of thing, because it speaks to the point to be able to do this early. So then when you're actually conceiving and having dialogue about policy, you've got that information you need. So at the point in time you need to do the analysis, you actually have the evidence at hand to make good decisions and design the programs properly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Zahid?
Thank you, Chair. My question would be for the Auditor General's office. So, given that there was no departments to implement gender-based analysis into their policy and decision-making, were you able to identify any common elements that characterize those departments that you elected to take part of that process? And also, do you have any sense of any factors that led some departments to adopt the practices and some not?
Mr. Chair, in regard to the barriers that explain the reason why the GBA was not always performed, actually, I think I'll answer your two questions in one answer, which is, I think it's easier for some departments to do GBA than others. It's easier if it has a social component, if it touches human being directly. Then you have the gender impact is easier to quantify. The data probably exists. When you're looking at, for example, the Automotive Innovation Fund, the impact on gender is less direct. There is an impact on gender, but you have to, and the data might not exist. So some departments have a better reflex to do GBA analysis than others. So this could explain why departments did better than some. Also, in paragraph 158, the other barrier we provide, a potential barrier, is the tight deadlines. Some departments find out through the budget process that they're responsible for a new initiative. And then they have at the last minute to prepare, sometimes they even have to prepare an MC after the budget. Deadlines are tight, and pressure is on the system to produce and deliver rapidly that new initiative. And sometimes it happens that GBA will not take place at that moment. This doesn't prevent the department to do GBA at a later stage, let's say when the program is renewed. But there's a lot of variation of when to do GBA, a lot of variation of what the reflexes are in the departments. And again, going back to that issue of no mandatory requirements to perform GBA, some are, even though there's no mandatory requirement, some do it very well. So maybe the answer is maybe there's no need for a mandatory requirement, but maybe you need mandatory requirement for those for which GBA is more challenging. I'm not sure if I answered both of your questions in my single answer here, but.
Thank you very much. We'll now move back to Mr. Albus, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and
5 minutes.
Thank you to all the people who are here to present. Appreciate your service to our country. I'd like just to start first with the Auditor General. Has the report structure, the way the report is written, changed in this previous report over year?
We've introduced a new reporting format, I believe, the cycle before this one. So I believe the May 2015 report would have adopted that new reporting format.
And the reason why I raise this is not specific to this issue, but I hate the new report structure. I really would wish the Auditor General would survey and ask members of Parliament. Maybe that's something that should be done, because I really found that these reports, just the way they're structured, it's much more difficult to get information out. That being said, I'd like just to move on to PCO and Treasury Board Secretariat. I do share a lot of what Mr. Christopherson has said, just in terms of Groundhog Day revisiting some of the same issues. And I think there's legitimate criticism in that. And there's no easy outs on many of these things. As I think you said, it's complex stuff. However, you know, there's some talk about capacity building at PCO, some capacity building for Treasury Board Secretariat staff to be able to more firmly challenge departments as they do their MCs, as they do their Treasury Board submissions. That's correct, is that right? Well, my understanding is that ultimately parliamentarians can hold a minister to account. And I was a little surprised that the government's response, considering that there was so much around gender parity in the cabinet, you know, because it's 2015, 2016, that there wasn't the requirements, you know, based on the Auditor General's reports, to make it mandatory for government ministers to understand and take mandatory training on GBA analysis so that they, whether through their capacity as the head of the agency or head of the department, can challenge their deputies and can challenge their staff to make sure that gender-based analysis is being done, because they hold their departments accountable. The second part is many ministers serve on Treasury Board Secretariat, and there's a huge challenge function there as well, because they check both the work of Treasury Board Secretariat and the individual departments. So has there been any discussion on making a mandatory training for ministers when it comes to gender-based analysis plus?
Sure. I would start with the Minister of Status of Women's mandate letter, where it's been made very clear by the Prime Minister that he expects all ministers to engage in this, and provides a particular charge to the Minister of Status of Women to work with her colleagues to improve the GBA process. But
I agree that would be a helpful step, right, but I don't necessarily...
In terms of specific training for ministers, I'm not aware of any particular formal program in this regard.
Okay, I just think even a 2-day program or even a 2-hour program so that they can ask the questions of their deputies when these things are coming forward. Because if you look at what the Auditor General said, the barriers: limited senior management review of the completeness of gender-based analysis and limited capacity in departments and agency for conducting gender-based analysis. If a minister was able to ask the question before an MC was formed or before something was going to Treasury Board, he or she would be able to say to that deputy or to the deputy, I would say, have you made sure this is part of the MC? To me, that's just a natural step. I'm just going to move to capacity building and challenge function. I've always considered status of women, you know, to have a little bit of both. But it seems to be that the role of status of women seems to be more effective on a capacity building. I don't know if it's just because you're an outside agency, unless it's in someone's mandate letter or they've been told that they have to cooperate. It doesn't seem to be very effective as far as you know, a challenge function, because you're just not a natural player the same way that PCO or Treasury Board would be. So as far as capacity building, and Mr. Davies actually mentioned this, has there been any discussion about having a status of women go-to source at Statistics Canada, where you can actually start to pull some of the data and then disperse it to different agencies? I would hate to see every department go through that process. Having someone at Statistics Canada that's aware of those issues and makes that information would be helpful.
Very quickly, whoever wants to answer, we only have 30 seconds.
Sure. We actually work with Stats Canada on this Women in Canada chapters. There's 14 chapters, and we work with various departments, and everybody pools the money together, and we decide collectively in terms of what's the data that we need, which is sex disaggregated. So that's something that we've been working on, and we intend to work on it in the future in prioritized ways.
We'll now move to Ms. Mendez and Mr. Lefebvre.
Façon surprenante ou non, mais je vais prendre.
I will follow up on what Mr. Christopherson said. Thank you to all of you for being here today. I believe that the problem we have here is the lack of obligation on behalf of different departments to start the gender-based analysis when it comes to applying it to their various programs. GBA. I think making it mandatory You say that it already exists to a certain extent, that it's part of the questionnaire. But what is the penalty for a department if it's not filled out? Because the problem exists. There's no counterbalance from what I understand. To answer the question, there's no definitive distinction except for public reporting and reporting to Parliament. The comply and show does not seem to be enough to force departments to produce the required analyses. Do you agree that this has not allowed departments to truly take this into account when preparing submissions? The Auditor General's office has not made specific policy recommendations. It was noted that the lack of making it mandatory could be an obstacle, and in the opening statement from Status of Women, there was going to be a survey conducted to determine which obstacles were in place. Perhaps the analysis will demonstrate that this reflex of establishing GBA from the beginning is not always present. And perhaps in a situation like that one, perhaps the government could, and again, it's not up to the OAG to promote this idea, perhaps at that time, decisions will be made to make GBA mandatory. At this time, you are entirely correct. In the template for the memo to Cabinet and Treasury Board submissions, there are sections where departments and agencies are required to provide that information. Central agencies like the SCT and PCO are supposed to exert a certain challenge function over the other departments if they determine that the GBA in documents to Cabinet is considered weak. In theory, there is an exchange, and it's theoretical because we cannot observe it ourselves. So you're saying that there is no penalty if the analysis is not conducted. At this time, indeed, there is no sanction if the GBA is determined to be incomplete or weak. If policy development did not take into account impact on certain individuals, it could be considered a badly developed policy. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. In 2009, no one was responsible for GBA, and it wasn't mandatory. In 2016, it's the same thing. It's a shared responsibility. It's not mandatory. We were expecting a different result in good faith. However, this is a source of concern. If it were to become mandatory, if Cabinet were to say that this is mandatory, what would change, Mr. Linklater? As I've understood the question, I believe that with the tools that we are developing now, we will have the opportunity to improve our capacity and to help departments conduct GBA properly. However, it's difficult for us to verify or to provide good data to the Auditor General, given that the policy development process is sometimes based on meetings, conversations. There's not a great deal of written evidence. Now, when it comes to developing policy, we want a kind of repository for information to prove that the process was followed properly and to indicate that departments have provided information to support GBA. Mr. Chair, I'm just trying to understand. We say that it's not mandatory, and we're concerned about it. But if it were to become mandatory, what would change? If in the Cabinet we say this has to be mandatory, what would really change? If it were to become mandatory, I would say that the quality of programs and policies would improve. Given that, we would have the capacity to obtain data, as indicated by Mr. Davies earlier. We would have the opportunity to develop evaluations in order to ensure that differential impacts are taken into account when developing policies and programs.
Now move back to Mr. Godin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I'm sensing here is that you have reacted, and I'm talking about all departments, you've reacted under the pressure of the audit of the Auditor General. I sense that when the report was tabled, you accelerated the process, and you said, oh, yes, we do indeed have to look into this. My colleague across the way mentioned obligation. The only sanction is to indicate it to the public. There's no follow-up if ever a department does not conform or does not reach its objectives. My question is very specific. If we were to launch a process to force departments to produce results, sir, you mentioned that it would improve quality. I don't want quality, I want effectiveness. If it were mandatory, would it be effective? That would depend on the circumstances as indicated. Sometimes departments don't have a great deal of opportunity to deliver, if you will, if there are pressures, if there's an urgent situation. It means that when the analysis is presented, or when the draft policy is presented, sometimes there is not enough time to conduct all of the required analyses. That being said, we can always go back to that policy in the future in order to make sure that an analysis was conducted. Yes, thank you, I understand. We have a time limit here, so we have very strict time limits. Thank you for your answer. From what I understand is that obligation is not a guarantee of success. Let's look at this from a more positive angle. Where is Canada placed when compared to other countries on this particular matter? Where are we? Are we the last? Are we the first? Do we have any comparative analysis? Yes, I think we're in the middle range. We know that other countries look to us
for examples of GBA. So we've been sharing our GBA work with other countries as well as with the provinces. So for example, Alberta, who has just established a new Department of Status of Women, they have adopted our GBA course and are making it mandatory, the course mandatory for all their civil servants and their ministers. So there are examples of that in terms of, we're looked to other countries for our GBA. And as I said, GBA is just a tool in terms of achieving gender equality. So in terms of, Canada's ranking internationally on gender equality, it varies, but we're not, in the top 10 countries in terms of having achieved gender equalities. We're in the middle of the pack.
But if other countries are consulting us, it's because we're not doing too badly. Yes, we can put it that way. Now, with additional tools, if you look at the models of the 10 best countries, if you compare the tools that they have and that you do not, what are the tools that they have that ensure that they are in a better position in this ranking?
I would say that, it's various levers that these countries use to achieve gender equality. So it's part of policies, programs, legislation. So for example, having childcare or having, parental leave, which is for fathers only, daddy quotas as they call them, or quotas for women on boards or women in senior executive positions in the private and public sector. Those are various factors, wage gap, for example. Those are the various factors that comprise the index for gender equality. And then GBA is a tool, and we can look into what other kinds of tools, like do they use GBA or other ways of making sure that their policies and programs take gender considerations into account, and we'd be happy to provide that to the committee in terms of an international scan of where GBA is used by the top 10 countries, or we can get back to you on that. But as I said, it's a tool to make sure that you look at the two, the impact on men and women, and make sure that there are not barriers to full participation or they're left out.
We'll now move back to the government side and to Mr. Area and Ms. Shanahan. 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair. Sorry, I have to go back to this mandatory requirements. Ms. Ballantyne, you mentioned that all federal government and agencies are expected to incorporate gender-based analysis into their decision-making process. The PCO, in their action plan, they said PCO will implement a policy consideration checklist as a mandatory component, and it goes on to talk about GBA+. Can you please tell us, I also would like to hear from the Treasury Board, whether now is it mandatory, or will it be made mandatory, or it should be made mandatory?
If I could, I mentioned in my opening remarks, Mr. Chair, that the audit provided an opportunity for us to look at what we could do better, and one of the tools that we are developing is this mandatory checklist. As the Auditor General had stated, there is in the memorandum to Cabinet template a requirement for departments to state whether or not a GBA has been done on a specific policy proposal. Depending on the quality of the work that's behind that, it may be more developed in the actual memorandum to Cabinet or not. And one of the issues that we had, and I think the Auditor General discovered this as well, that in performing our challenge function, PCO was not documenting our interaction with individual departments on the GBA aspect of the policy in a very systematic or helpful way. What we are thinking is now with a checklist, we'll be able to ask departments to put in writing whether or not they've conducted a gender-based analysis. If not, why not, at a very high level, to inform as to why they believe there are no gender implications with the policy, or if there is, to actually attach the GBA work that they've done or make reference to it that they would have in their records. I think as we move forward with the reporting under our action plan that my colleague was referring to, we will have ourselves this very rich inventory of information to be able to go back to for reference purposes to say, yes, in terms of X number of policy proposals, X% had a GBA completed, Y% did not, and here's why. And I think that's one of the key aspects of the audit, is getting PCO and Treasury Board to that next question of, and here's why.
Ms. Shanahan.
Thank you, Chair. Of course, this is a very important. It's important that it gets done, GBA, but what I'm really excited about is that it makes better policy, and I'm very excited about some of the examples that we see here in the Auditor General's report. One that worked very well, and another that worked not so well. So I'd like to hear from our witnesses on that. So that would be in Aboriginal Affairs, is that Ms. Kennedy, and then from Monsieur Paquette about the apprenticeship program.
We have about 2 minutes.
I'd like to just speak to you quickly about the Family Violence Prevention Program. It was evaluated in 2012, and as part of the evaluation for the program renewal, it was actually discovered that there were elements of the program that needed a bit more nuancing, in that the prevention side of it wasn't really targeting any of the issues that men and boys face once they'd been victims of violence. And so there was a concerted effort to shift the program somewhat to make sure that we're addressing those needs, as well as the other fundamental parts of the program, which are to fund the 41 shelters across the country. I would just note in wrapping up that the GBA policy has been mandatory at Indigenous and Northern Affairs since 1999. So we do take it seriously.
Yes, very quickly. Same. I mean, in our department, Employment and Social Development, you cannot develop policy without doing GBA. So In the example that was used in the report, that was a typical example where we were pressed with time, so we had to do this development fairly quickly. So there was some assessment that was done but not completed, and we kept working on it afterwards to make sure that we would have a full picture. We also use other tools to continue to work on increasing the participation of women in the apprenticeship sector, and part of the issue here is that it's a low participation to start with, and some of the programs that we are funding through the provinces and territories, for example, were used as well to promote trades among women, and same thing with a federal ad campaign that was targeted towards women to increase the participation. Of course, when we look at participation in the trades, it's lower, particularly compared to college or university enrollment, where women, in fact, are the majority there.
Thank you. We'll now move to Mr. Christofferson. We're in the next series for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Monsieur Gaudin asked about where we were, and the answer was we're not in the top 10, and which is really not very good at all, given that we're a G7 country. We're not even in the top 10. And Belgium is an example where Belgium's Gender Mainstreaming Act, which is another term for this, they not only has the legal basis for compulsory identification of the analysis, they also do a follow-up and evaluation of the actions afterwards. So there's a real commitment, not kind of the wishy-washy stuff that we're talking about here. Also, I wanted to just mention our friend from the Privy Council. You know, here's what he said this morning. Strong and effective GBA practices have guided governments over the years to ensure greater equality between women and men in all areas of government programming. We will both continue and strengthen our efforts to ensure that policy and program proposals are meeting the needs of all Canadians. You'd almost think that you hadn't read the auditor's report to come out and say something that cheery. Because the Auditor General said that 20 years had passed since the government committed to applying this type of analysis. In other words, gender considerations, including obstacles to the full participation of diverse groups of women and men, are not always considered in government decisions. This finding is similar to what we found in our 2009 audit. That's the world we're in, not that kind of fluffy nonsense. Now, there was a reference to one piece of federal legislation that has this as mandatory. I'm aware that another one is the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, actually has Canadian legislation that has a legislative requirement to provide GBA in terms of the impact, and they have to report on that impact. So my question is this. They have mandatory. It's a piece of federal legislation that exists right now. My question is very, very specific. Has this been a problem? Because it's mandatory. We now have an example in the government where it's mandatory. Has that been a complete disaster? Is there a problem with this? Would you back away from the mandatory aspect in this act if you could?
My experience with the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act is that the GBA, the legislated GBA requirements have been helpful and have actually led us to look at IRC as a department that does GBA well.
I want to end on a positive note, because that's twice now that you've given answers that I really, really like. Not so much in what you wrote, but you were asked point blank, what would happen if mandatory was brought in? I'll review the answer. We will when we do our report. But I got to say, sir, I thought when you answered that, you were answering just like straight up, it would do this, and I understand the political dance of where you can go on the recommendations, but so I'm beginning to maybe get a sense of where we are, but I like that answer, and your answer when it's put to you directly, I have to say, and I'll give you a chance to correct the record if you want, but it seems to me if a professional bureaucrat, take that as a positive compliment, is asked the direct question, does mandatory reporting on GBA give us better legislation? I'm hearing yes.
That's my experience, yes.
Thank you, sir.
Back to the government side, Mr. Lefebvre.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to take out the action plan that you guys have provided us, if you guys have that. First question, from 2009 to 2016, was this action plan similar, or was there an action plan?
Yes, there was a departmental action plan that was tabled with this committee in 2009, and this one is different. The other one, we were just starting out in terms of engaging with departments, and we had
You mean in 2009 or 2015?
2009. In
Okay.
2009, we had a phased implementation working with various departments. So from 2009 to 2015, that's what all of us did, is work together with the departments. What we found is that we still need to continue to do that, working with the departments, but we're adopting things like a cluster approach. So we're taking all the science departments and bringing them together so that they can learn from each other in terms of sharing best practices, what's worked with the health department, public health agency, or the Canadian Institutes of Health Research or Security. So there are differences from the last action plan to this one.
Okay, so very quickly, if we can go, because I'm seeing target dates. We have the response to the recommendations, and then we have the action plan, and we have the target dates. Some are a bit open. We have, just on page 2, ongoing, then on page 3, a lot of are ongoing as well. Is it possible to provide us with fixed dates as to when we can receive these actually, when the action plans are going to start to be put together, or are these already put together and these are just going to be ongoing all the whole time?
Yes. So, for example, on page 3, where we're talking about having these various governance structures to monitor this, is like having the steering committee with the 3 of us, meeting with folks, or having our champions network. So those are meetings that have started in the past, and we're going to increase them in some cases.
So, Mr. Chair, just to make sure that if we, I know there are also some programs or some documents that we'll be providing. If we can keep a tab as to what's going on there, so we can see the progress of this, Mr. Chair.
Also put that into the report.
Yes, please. Mrs. Zahida had a question.
Thank you, Chair. My question would be for Mr. Linklater. In further to our discussion on making GBA as the mandatory requirement, it has been more than 20 years since Canada committed to analyzing gender-specific policy impacts on women and men before making any decisions on policies, legislations, and programs throughout all the government departments and agencies as part of the United Nations Fourth World Conference on Women in 1995. I think the Auditor General report shows that we have not made fairly minimum progress in the last 2 decades. So this is, I guess, unsurprising, since it seems that GBA is more of a request of our government departments rather than a requirement mandated by PCO or the Treasury Board. My question is what consequences are there if managers do not have their performance or that of their department measured and evaluated, at least in part, based on their implementation of GBA? Of course, implementation will be incomplete and spotty. So I have to ask, if PCO is not going to make GBA mandatory, just how seriously should we take your commitment to its wider adoption? And as you mentioned in your opening remarks, that the Prime Minister's mandate letter to the Minister of Status for Women called for GBA to be applied to proposals for cabinet decision-making. Is this enough to make GBA mandatory, or do you need any further policy direction on that?
I don't think we need further policy direction. What we do need is a focus on implementation. And so, as the audit has pointed out, progress has been limited since 2009. And so the tools that we're looking at developing, the processes that we're putting in place across government have to be more meaningful, and also ensure that we are working with departments to gather the data that's required, the disaggregated data, for them to improve their policy development process. And then as proposals are coming forward either to the cabinet table from a policy perspective or to Treasury Board for implementation, that our analysts have the training to be able to challenge departments on the GBAs systematically, and that we're documenting systematically that challenge function, which we have not been doing to date.
So you think that you really don't need any further policy directive?
Well, I think in terms of the tone and the expectations that the Prime Minister has set, The fact that the Minister of Status of Women is at the Cabinet table to challenge all policy proposals that are coming through for ratification has been a significant improvement in raising the profile of the need to do this. The fact that the Minister has written to her colleagues that we're putting in place the more rigorous oversight among the central agencies around these processes, I think that is going to help us with information sharing and to bring along departments who've been struggling with the barriers to advancing GBA.
Move back to Mr. Albus, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to go back to the discussion we were having earlier regarding Statistics Canada, and you were suggesting that Status of Women is working on a set of tools so that could be dispersed. One of the challenges I have, I sit on the Pay Equity Committee right now, and we've heard from a number of departments, and they're not able to tell us. They know that the situation of pay equity has gotten better in the last 10 years, but they can't. No one has been able to identify why. And I think that one of the issues, and I think again it was described as complex stuff that we're dealing with this, is that we don't necessarily have the data nor the explanation behind the data to be able to adequately address the issue. When is this Statistics Canada project that you're working with going to come to fruition? When is it going to start being made available to different departments?
I should just clarify, the Statistics Canada project that I was talking about is the Women in Canada, the Women in Canada publications, which we've been working on. I can't remember the exact date, but I think since before 2009, in terms of having reports, sex disaggregated data for gender. So, overall stats on women and then in specific populations. But what I think you're referring to is something that departments, as my colleague, Mr. Paquette, was saying, that each of the departments is also looking at sex disaggregated data in their departments for their policies and programs.
And the suggestion I would make here is that I do see an opportunity for Status of Women to actually embed a small operation and then be a liaison to all the different agencies. Rather than them trying to establish that own in-house, you have a go-to hub of information that will help with gender-based analysis. To me, that's just a logical step. Now, you mentioned earlier regarding the province of Alberta that ministers, it's a mandatory for them to take gender-based analysis training. Is that correct?
I'll have to confirm it. I certainly know in the civil service, in the Alberta Civil Service, all deputy ministers have to take this course, and all their ADMs and senior management. I'm not sure about the actual deputy ministers, but we can get the ministers. I'm sorry,
yeah, okay.
But we can get back to you on that because
that would be helpful because I do think that again, if we're going to take a whole of government approach, and this government seems to continue to say that they want to do that, why would you just make it where the Status of Women minister was that check and balance at Treasury Board or whatnot? Why wouldn't you want every minister making those same demands of their deputy ministers and the deputy ministers of their senior staff? That's how you build accountability, and that's how you build direction. Now, getting back to the barriers side, maybe I'll ask this of the Auditor General's office. To me, I don't disagree that an absence of mandatory government requirements is an issue. But I also would say that even if you put in place, I used to be a municipal councillor, we always used to say, if you can't enforce a bylaw, if it's an information gap, if it is a capacity gap, if it is a lack of management training, how do you solve that? Because you can require all you want, but if the capacity isn't there to be able to bring, each department up to an adequate level where it can meet off of that department, what would be, just from a management perspective, I think we all agree gender-based analysis is a critical tool, but from a management perspective, how does just making it a requirement do it?
Our Auditor General's department, please. Mr. Dominguez.
Mr. Chair, I think you're right on. Mandatory requirement would not solve the GBA issue by itself. Training is key here. I've mentioned the word reflex a few times. Departmental officials, when they design policies, what's important for them is not so much, there's a requirement, I should fill the box and do a GBA. What's important is they do a good GBA, that they think by themselves that there's a requirement to do that. But as I said, it varies greatly from department to department. And again, we're not there to promote a policy decision here. That's not my job. But if the government was going to think that mandatory requirement is part of the solution, it's only one. Mandatory requirement will be only part of the solution. You need training. You need a proper challenge function at the center.
Going back to PCO and Treasury Board, you know, we have this Canada School of Public Service. You know, they're supposed to, I believe the reason why they were founded was to help create excellence in the public service, do academic publishing and whatnot. Have we asked, or your offices, any of you asked for a study to be done? Because the side of the desk issue, where things always get shunted to the side of a desk, to me, it would be nice to see some quasi-independent from people that know management and within the federal public service that could look at the issue. Has there been any contemplation of asking them to do a report on this?
Ms. Ballantyne.
We are working with the Canada School and Public Service in terms of making our training, our online course, available as a core curriculum for all policy and program officers. So they're going to be rolling it out for us, but I think you're referring to a
like a filling the gap, so outlining what exactly, because again, the complex stuff Art, you know, referenced earlier.
Yeah, no, we haven't talked to them about a study, but we can certainly explore that idea.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to Mr. Christofferson for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Seems to me that the Auditor General's representative pretty much summed up where we are, acknowledging that the mandatory is only part, but the training is in there, and then the proper analysis. The back two pieces, I think, are already in the action plan. Seems to me, of the things that the Auditor General's office is saying will make a difference, the one that's still missing is this mandatory, and that's clearly what this is going to come down to. I can only hope that the committee will ultimately make that recommendation, which is step one, and step two is that the government listens and brings in that change, and if not, well, you know, politics will take over from there and we'll deal with it in the public arena. But I really don't have a whole lot more to say. I've said my bit, and I'm satisfied that the action plan deals with most of the issues that need to be looked at. I think it's a good action plan. I'm satisfied with it. The timelines seem to work. I was listening to Mr. Lefebvre ask about the time frames, and I think that looks fairly solid, but it just seems to me the piece that's missing is the mandatory, and the staff, the bureaucrats representing the staff, they can't make that recommendation, and the Auditor General's made it clear that he can only go so far. So, I mean, you know, it only takes just a smattering of common sense to get to the part where it looks like the key thing we need to do is the mandatory piece, especially since we've already got it in at least one, if not two, pieces of existing legislation, and nobody's lighting their hair on fire saying this is causing the world to collapse around us. So, you know, with that, I'm gonna end on that note that it seems to me that our job now is, in my opinion, is to convince ourselves collectively that we can get a unanimous report that would speak to moving to a mandatory reporting system. And then from there, it's up to the government to respond. And if we can't get that in the report, then I can assure you, Chair, that this matter will not die. It shall find its way into other public arenas. Of that, I can guarantee you, sir. So with that, I thank you, and I thank all our participants. This has been a good session. Now it's time for us to do our job. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Christofferson. We're taking special note that he actually left 2 minutes on the table, and I know he could back off on that too. Ms. Mendez.
Chair, I absolutely concur with what Mr. Christofferson just said, and yes, I mean, it is our job now to pursue it as a committee, but I would also take on what many of the comments Mr. Alba's made. Surprisingly, I actually agree with a lot of them. But I also would like to know, since '95, okay, we're at 2 audits, if I'm not mistaken. This is the second audit in a very short period, 6 years. Why was never an audit done before?
You mean from our office?
Well, yeah.
As opposed to an internal audit from Status of
not their internal audits, yes.
Because we, as an office, decided that time was required for the 2009 action plan to mature and
No, I'm talking the 95 one.
Oh, the 95
The commitment
one,
in 1995, because from 95 to 2009, 14 years went by after Canada made the commitment to engage in active gender-based analysis, and we've never had an audit before. The first one was in 2009.
It's at the request, Mr. Chair, of the Sheila Fraser, who at the time was the Auditor General, who was attending, I think, a hearing of the Status of Women Committee, and the GBA file was discussed then. And it's when she left that meeting that she tasked the office to perform a GBA audit, so that would have been 2009. But
way of measuring what had been done since 95 to 2007 or
no.
We have nothing
the 2009 report, Mr. Chair, is a snapshot of the situation as of that year. We don't see how the file evolved over those 14 years.
Would you in any of the departments know what had been implemented, attempted, tried?
I think, and I'm not certain of the timeline here, but perhaps even the formation of the Status of Women department might have been in response to the 95. Is that right or wrong? No? Okay.
No, but I'm curious to know, because why suddenly did we have this first audit when the policy had been in place since 95? I mean, this had been a commitment by Canada. We only had the first audit in 2009, but what happened meanwhile? Were any of the departments already conducting gender-based analysis in their policy making? Were they? By then, when you went in the first time in 2009? Sorry, Mr. Bauer. Yeah.
I could just say, perhaps, Mr. Chair, that I know at Natural Resources Canada we did not do gender-based analysis, certainly not systemically, and it's actually only been since the third phase of the action plan that Natural Resources Canada has done that. Mm-hmm. And today, NRCan does, for all of its Treasury Board submissions, all of its memoranda to Cabinet, and all of its budget submissions to the Department of Finance, conducts gender-based analysis, and that's new. So I know we're not, I don't have the history
new
to
as
go
in
back.
How new?
It's new for Natural Resources Canada.
Yeah, but since when? New since when?
It's new since I guess in 2014 we will have de facto accomplished it as a comprehensive. We made the commitment in 2013.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Madam Kennedy has. Yeah.
I just wanted to point out that for Indigenous and Northern Affairs, the GBA policy was adopted as a mandatory requirement in 1999. And at that point in time, we did actually establish a fairly deep capacity building exercise. At this point in time, we have GBA representatives throughout our department on all the programs who advise on program renewals, on policy development, on research. We actually have draft negotiation guidelines for GBA for self-government and comprehensive land claims in the process. So we've taken a fairly deep commitment, and it's quite long-standing in our department. So.
Ms. Kennedy?
That was one department. Mr. Is anything at industry, at the former industry?
Just to add, in terms of what we've done is talking about mandatory. We made it mandatory last year that all employees in the department would take the training, which if you do, you actually come to the insight that this is about doing your job well and applying rigorous thinking, seeking data sources, and thinking through things. And it's extremely well done. I would imagine that product could be exported to many jurisdictions that would benefit from it, because it's been prepared in a very professional way. And for me, that materially is an important step of making this something that is embedded in the organization. When you have 3,800 employees, we're at 90% now. We've got to figure out where the last 10% are, but we'll follow up. When they have taken this and then they actually start to ask the question, I need data. Where would I get this data? How would I prepare myself so when I'm doing my work, I have the tools available? I think that's when the kind of progress really takes hold. It's not just in a document, it actually becomes embedded.
Part of those agreements you have with Statistics Canada? And
that's exactly why we provided the funding to supplement information, particularly women and in education and technology, and to have more facts at hand when we're doing the work we do.
Mr. Paquette, yeah, Mr. Paquette has.
Well,
Mr. Paquette.
Complete the round. So we've been doing it for quite a while, and I would say that so we have a training in place. We have the center of expertise that we are revamping as well, and I would say that at this point we are updating also the guides and the tools that we have, because that's something that we need to do. One thing that I would underline is data is always a challenge. So sometimes we do have data, sometimes we don't, and that is probably the first question, where to go to get the information. But one thing that we're going to establish, which will be new as well, is a network of policy analysts, because even if you do training, what we realize is that some of the questions they're facing, policy questions, are tough and difficult, and by having, especially some that in some sectors that are not necessarily doing it very often versus others that are used to it, so creating that network of community of practice where they can ask a question and seek some advice from those ones that have better experience will, we think, help to get better results out of these assessments.
Thank you very much.
Those are elements that are interesting for us to keep into
Yes.
account. Thank you.
Certainly,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
as we move forward in a report. I don't have any other questions on this side. We will come back to Ms. Shanahan. I do have one just follow-up from the chair, just in a passing statement that you made, and that was in regards to, I think from what my analysts also say, we were making reference to equality in hiring and percentages of the equality there in the workplace. And that, I think, is where you were, Ms. Ballantyne, were suggesting that, we may or may not be in the top 10 in the world. But gender-based analysis goes much beyond, percentages of different genders in workplaces. It's every policy coming through. Is there an analysis on this? Has there been adequate analysis? So going back just to the gender-based analysis, what are the countries? Who are the leading countries? I know that really, and in speaking with you in the past, that Canada is one of the guiding lights perhaps for other countries, and certainly our provinces look to Canada. But maybe you would just answer, who is in that top 10? Like, what other countries are there? Where is Canada when it comes to gender-based analysis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you're absolutely right in terms of differentiating between the tool and the actual goal it's trying to achieve. So gender-based analysis as a true tool, we have one of the best in the world. So we've modeled it after the Europeans, who have, that's where the plus came from. So it's not just GBA, but it's actually going deeper than the impact on women and men, but looking at the ages of women or the income levels of women or the ethnicity or language. So our tool has been modeled after some European tools, and we're now basically looked to from other countries as a model. So as I was saying to you, when we were at the United Nations Committee on the Status of Women, we've heard a lot about Canada and the tools and the structures we have in place over here to advance this. So our tool, the GBA tool, the online course that my colleagues were referring to, has been looked to as a model in terms of how we're carrying this out in Canada. And then we're all learning from each other. So basically, we try to have this continuous improvement cycle so that as we get more feedback or as we learn from other countries in terms of what they're doing to the tool that they started with from us, and then we adopt their best practices as well.
Thank you. And so again, and I'm not putting words in anyone's mouth. It's not where the whole program of gender-based analysis is a fail. It's more in response to the Auditor General's. How can we move it always to more enhance the program that is already viewed as very well? And that's why we appreciate Auditor General's reports and then responses from the different departments. We'll move back to Ms. Shanahan, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm interested too in really the component where how we're going to build better policy using gender-based analysis. We don't want to just give lip service to it. We want to really make it happen. And what I'm seeing, it's a culture change within departments, with long-standing employees, coming from very different places. I like very much this idea of the champions network and the community of practice that I'm hearing here. So maybe Ms. Ballantyne, just to talk a little bit about how we're going to get behavior change in the workplace here.
I think you've pointed to the number of initiatives that we're all working on, but I think the most important culture change is the leadership from the top, in terms of from the government, from our minister. And our minister is a very activist minister, and she is really gung-ho. She's taken the course. All her staff are taking the course or have taken it. And I know at the Standing Committee on Women, there's going to be a recommendation, or they're considering whether all ministers and their staff take this course so that they can then play the challenge function with their deputies. So I think it's coming from the top, and there is a real sense of movement here. And then, as I said, with my deputy colleagues, because my minister has written to all her colleagues, and she is not shy about pressing them, as my colleague said, at the cabinet table or earlier on. For example, on the infrastructure funding for shelters for women, that was, a concerted effort made by her and all of us to really push to say this is really important for women's issues, and that bore fruit early on. And I think, some of the work that colleagues at Treasury Board are going to be doing in terms of the regulatory frameworks, we're going to be looking at the regulations, which is, different than legislation. There's a real rigorous, impact statement and cost-benefit analysis. So I think if we can tap into the regulatory side of things, and we can tap into the evaluation, which can then inform policies, I really feel very, very optimistic that this time around, that we'll be able to make progress. And, I'd like to say, so there is this will, there's this engagement, there's this leadership, and nothing precludes, as the democratic process unfolds, for us going down the mandatory route. And as our colleague has said, to me, I think of it as mandatory. It might be necessary, but we don't know yet. But it's certainly not a sufficient requirement, because we need the training, we need the capacity, we need all that, because you could make it mandatory and it could still fail. So let's try this approach and let's see where it goes.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I think that concludes our meeting for today. Many departments appearing before our committee, as well as the Auditor Generals, and we appreciate all of you being here. Thank you for the good work that you do, and we look forward to hearing in the future where the report has been issued from this committee, and that the different departments are looking at it as well. So we are adjourned.